Hey guys, John here. Today we're going to talk about one button presets because I feel like when people talk about those, they talk about them in a bad way and don't really like them for whatever reason. I think the argument is I hit a button and there's a whole song going on in the synth, and maybe, yeah, sure, it sounds cool, but what do I do with it? And I think that's more so the issue rather than the one button preset. Maybe it feels like it lacks creativity in a certain way, but I don't think that's the case. So here's kind of my take on this. So we have Avenger. This is a monster of a synthesizer. Now down here, obviously, as we know, we have these three macro knobs and then two buttons below, and we can add more pages to add more buttons and macros and all that as well. So that's kind of the first thing that we should think about or have in the back of our mind, which I know we all know this, but it's a good thing to have a refresher on that. So for example, we can have oscillators in here, we can have samples, we can have all these crazy things, and then we also have a drum oscillator or a drum section more specifically that we can really add to make drum grooves. We can put our own drums in there. So we all know these things, right? So for example, let's say we have this first osc, and a kind of a normal patch I'll make is I'll bring this mix up here. Right, let's put this on an arp. And maybe for this here, let's drop down the tempo. Instead of 140, let's go like 106. So we have something kind of like that. So we can also have some slow groove going. So we have this oscillator, and then we want to maybe detune it a little bit and drop down the pan. It's because we're going to make kind of a bass arp here. Let's bring our cutoff down and give it some envelope and change out our filter to maybe the 24 and some resonance. All right, so we have this here, and then as normal, what we usually do, go with an EQ, give it some nice low end, and maybe take out some of the mud. And there we go. Add a compressor. So we have this bass arp. Very cool. And then say, okay, we want to add some drums in here, and we can go maybe into the EDM4 and let's say the classic kit. Or the city kit, that's actually kind of cool too. Okay, so we have these two things. Very cool. Now, what's really cool about this here, so if we go into these drums, right, so these are going out master effects. Now, what we can do as well is we can assign these slots to auxes 1 through 12, which is really interesting because in our DAW, we can say that we want these outputs to go to our DAW. So if you're in Bitwig, for example, you can go here to this little button and then add missing chains. And then down here, we have the master output, which is cool. We have aux 1, 2, 3, and 4, which I've talked about in a previous video. And then we have all of our drum channels down here that we can process how we like to. So if we want to go to the bass drum, we can add an EQ, compression, whatever we want to do. We have the possibility to split these out into our DAW to do whatever it is that we want to do. Okay, so that's really cool within itself. So that's one way to get these drums out of the synthesizer and into our DAW and process how we want to. Right, so we have that. Now, our first bass here is osc1, so let's label this bass, right? So we have a bass oscillator, and this is getting sent to effects 1, which down here, it's going to our master effects. So let's say we want to get this again into our DAW. We have to change the routing to aux1, for example, right? So that's the output. And if we go down over here, we can see that this signal here, we solo this, that's our bass. So we can have our bass separated if we'd like to, which is another cool way to do as well. So with that being said, we have our bass, we have our drums, and let's say maybe we want to put these on macros, which is really cool with these buttons down over here. So when inside the mixer, let's say we want to have one for our drums and then one for our bass, right? So we have our drum fader here. We can bring this down and then we can drag and drop our macro over here. Let's label this drums. And depending on how we want to mix this, let's turn this on for now and kind of increase this value here. So maybe this is the loudest we want our drums to be. And then we can do the same for our bass. So the macro 2, we can go for bass. If we want to do it like this, then we can drag and drop this guy onto our bass. But let's bring this down first all the way and then turn this button on. And then for our bass, let's go ahead and mix this with this slider here. Okay, so maybe that's kind of cool there. So we have something like that. Now, if we go to our, where are we here? If we go to our zones and we're thinking, okay, we have our bass, we have our drums. Now the bass is basically all the way over through the keyboard and we don't necessarily need that. Let's say here we're like, okay, I don't need this note specifically. We can bring this down till it's quiet, and so we don't really want that, for example. And the drums, we could do the same depending on where we want this. So we have a key zone here, and on the higher stuff, we have nothing yet. And the same for our arp, just in case here. So the end note here, we didn't want this guy here, so we can go for maybe one below that. So it's going to stay on the same note, essentially. So now we're like, okay, we have drums, we have bass. Now in this patch, let's go ahead and add something else. So oscillator 2. Now for this guy, what we're going to do is add another effect stack. We can add another filter and potentially another amp if we'd like to. So for this guy, let's say we go output effects 2, filter 2 here, and then as well as the amp, let's go 2 as well. So if we solo this, it's basically a default sound wave, so a brand new patch, so to speak. So we can go to this mix here, and then for the amp 2, let's bring down our sustain, and then also route this to an arp, but let's go and add another one. So this arp is going to be 2. Let's turn this guy on. Right, so maybe something kind of rhythmic. Sure, that's kind of cool for now. Right, so our filter, and let's give it some interesting modulation. And then maybe some spread too. And then we can give it some delay, something kind of interesting, but bring this down, maybe do some compression on this guy. And then maybe some reverb as well. Maybe the AA reverb. And label this ARP for whatever reason. Okay, so then we close this out and then we play our patch together. I think, okay, maybe this is a little bit buried. Let's bring this up an octave here, and then maybe also in the zones. We don't need this ARP to be played down here, so we can maybe do something up like this. So down here where our bass and drums are, we're not going to hear the ARP up here. We hear it by itself. So that might be kind of cool. So we have drums, bass, and an ARP, and we can add some more stuff. We can add some little effects as we have more oscillators to go through. Now, the whole point of this is to say that, yes, we can have a whole song inside the synthesizer, and then as we modulate it and change it, that's where some of the creativity can happen in. So effects 2, we can say output aux 2. So if we close this out and we play some of our ARP here, we can see it's coming out down over here. So not only do the drums have their individual outs, but also these effects racks have their own individual outs as well that we can then use. So let's say we have this whole patch going on here and we say, maybe I want it to start off with this ARP here, whatever it may be. And then you can slowly introduce the bass or the drums or however you want to do it. So we can disable our drums, maybe have our drum or our bass kind of playing with our ARP. So we have something kind of like that maybe, and then at some point our drums come in on the downbeat. Now this can be modulated inside of our DAW, so long story short, we have this entire song within our patch, and I think when we play one button, we think, okay, this is all that there is, and it's like not necessarily, depending on how you turn some of the macros on, how you turn them off, how you actually play the patch can be entirely different. So one I had here is called Neon Soul, and it's a cool sequence that I came up with here. And this kind of is in that same vein, right? So I have the drums and the bass separately, you have a cutoff, resonance effects, and this patch is still a work in progress. However, what's really interesting about this one is that up here on the right-hand side, it's kind of this vintage synthesizer sound, I suppose, whatever. But on the left-hand side, we have bass and drums. A little bit of that synth. Right, so that's kind of cool. So we can disable the drums and just have the bass and that synth going. And 1, 2, 3, 4, the everything. So yeah, so then with the right-hand side, you can have a lead and then come in depending on how you would like to. But yeah, that's kind of just a I guess the thought process of it. So when we see those one button presets, it's not necessarily like this is all it can do. It's like, okay, this is like the full thing of everything kind of going on. How do I take things away, add things? And it's kind of like if you think about your 4, 8, 16 bar loops, we have all the content in there. We have the drums, the bass, the leads, all that cool stuff. So now we need to build things around that. So maybe build something slow up into that and then turn things off first. And then once that chorus hits, that's kind of the climax of the entire song. So even for this one, I'd probably like turn off the bass and the drums. And then maybe the bass comes in a little bit after that. Pause, play a little lead. Let it breathe, turn on the drums and everything. Yeah, so there we go. So I kind of wanted to make this video to talk about that a little bit because there's a lot of synthesizers out there that make the patches, do the things, I guess, right? Make our basses on arps, and it's kind of separate, right? It's like we'll use Diva for the bass, we'll use Repro for the lead, we'll use Pigments, whatever it is for other stuff. But a lot of that is separated, and inside Avenger, you can do it all inside one patch, and depending on how you set up your macros and how you turn things on and off, you can kind of do that all inside one patch, which is actually really cool. So that's kind of the thought process about that. I'm curious to see what you guys think about the one-button presets. I personally think they're cool because you can really study them and see how deep the rabbit hole really goes on some of those. The sound design on the packs that you get from the website, take a minute and look at them and look at all the modulations. It's kind of mind-blowing how deep those patches go. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Curious on what you guys think. Thank you for watching, and yeah, we'll see you in the next one.